The colony of Epsilon Prime was a beacon of human expansion, a place where settlers had carved out a thriving home on the edges of known space. The streets of New Horizon, the capital city, bustled with traders, scientists, and workers going about their day. Children laughed in the parks, and cargo haulers moved between towering structures, unloading materials for the colony's continued growth. Governor Alan Reeves, a man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair, looked out from his office, proud of what they had built. Epsilon Prime was supposed to be a testament to human resilience, a thriving metropolis that had taken years to construct. It wasn't without its challenges, harsh weather conditions, occasional pirate raids, but they had overcome every obstacle. Reeves had even started planning the next phase of expansion, a project that would connect the colony to wider trade networks. In the security sector, Diane Carter, the colony's chief of security, monitored her station, watching reports scroll across her screen. Something wasn't sitting right with her. Over the last 2 days, power fluctuations had been recorded in different sectors, and 2 supply ships had failed to check in. The orbital station, normally a hub of activity, had gone silent since the previous night. The engineers claimed it was just a routine issue, but Diane had spent years in the military before taking this job. She knew the difference between a technical glitch and something more sinister. Mark Davis, a senior engineer, wiped sweat from his brow as he worked on one of the colony's defense relays. He had spent the last 6 hours trying to figure out why some of the automated turrets weren't responding. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but deep in the code, someone had tampered with the system. He didn't like this. Not one bit. He made a note to report his findings to security, but before he could finish, a low, thunderous rumble filled the air. The sky darkened as massive warships descended from orbit. The Dominion had arrived. The first barrage hit the city center, reducing the governor's office and surrounding buildings to rubble. The shockwave shattered windows for miles, and a fireball roared through the streets. People screamed, running in every direction as more energy blasts rained down. The colony's defenses barely had time to activate before they were obliterated in a second wave of strikes. Diane Carter, thrown against the wall by the initial explosion, groaned as she struggled to her feet. She grabbed a nearby comm unit and shouted into it. "All security forces, evacuation protocol! Get the civilians underground now!" Her orders barely made a difference. The Dominion's ground forces landed within minutes, tall, armored soldiers with glowing visors, moving with cold efficiency. They cut down anyone in their way, securing key structures with brutal precision. In the skies above, the colony's orbital station detonated, a massive explosion splitting it apart. Whatever chance Epsilon Prime had of calling for help was gone. Diane knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just an invasion. This was extermination. Governor Reeves stood firm in his office as the building collapsed around him, gripping a communication device, broadcasting one final message to any human worlds that could hear him. "Epsilon Prime will not beg. We will not surrender. We are humanity. And we will not be forgotten." The transmission cut out as the city fell into chaos. Days passed. The fires continued to smolder, and the once thriving colony became a graveyard. Buildings lay in ruins, streets were littered with bodies, and the scent of burning metal filled the air. Dominion banners now hung from shattered towers, a clear sign that the planet was under their control. A group of Dominion officers surveyed the destruction, speaking in their guttural language. One of them kicked aside a charred helmet, smirking. "Another colony wiped out. Humans fall so easily." In the remains of an underground bunker, Mark Davis stirred. His body ached, his face was smeared with dirt and blood, but he was alive. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious, but as he crawled out into the ruined streets, he realized one thing with absolute certainty. He was the last survivor. Jack Calloway had been many things in his lifetime, a soldier, a strategist, a war hero, but now he was just a man trying to be left alone. He had spent the last 7 years in the Martian desert, far away from the conflicts that had once defined him. His small homestead was nothing special, a dusty outpost with a workshop, a half-functioning hoverbike, and a rusted-out satellite dish that barely picked up signals anymore. Life was simple. Quiet. He woke up, fixed what needed fixing, and drank whiskey as the Martian sun set. The local troublemakers at the nearest outpost had long since learned to leave him alone. A few had tried to push him, mistaking his graying hair and worn-out boots for weakness. One particularly cocky thug had even pulled a knife on him once. Jack had broken his wrist in 3 places and sent him back to his crew with a warning. After that, they kept their distance. It wasn't that Jack enjoyed the isolation, he just knew that every time he got involved in something, people died. He had seen too much war, lost too many good men. The galaxy could burn for all he cared. He was done fighting. At least, that's what he told himself. The knock on his door came just after midnight. Jack ignored it. Then came a second knock, weaker this time. He sighed, setting down his drink. When he opened the door, he barely had time to react before the man on the other side collapsed into his arms. Mark Davis was barely alive. His face was pale, his clothes torn, his body shaking from exhaustion. Jack dragged him inside, slamming the door shut before propping the man up against the couch. "Who the hell are you?" Jack muttered, grabbing a bottle of water and pressing it into Mark's hands. Mark coughed, barely able to hold the bottle. "Epsilon Prime, they took it, killed everyone." Jack felt something cold settle in his gut. He hadn't heard that name in years. Mark gasped for breath, gripping Jack's shirt. "The Dominion, they're moving fast. Earth's ignoring it. They don't care. I had to find you." Jack wanted to tell him to get lost, to take his problems somewhere else. But he looked into Mark's eyes and saw something familiar, something he had seen in too many dying soldiers during the war. Desperation. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. Damn it! He didn't realize he had already made his decision. The sun was just rising when Jack heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. He stepped outside, still half convinced he should just pack up and leave before whatever trouble was following Mark found him first. Then he saw the man stepping out of the armored transport, and knew running wasn't an option. Colonel Briggs. Jack hadn't seen him in years, but he recognized that sharp-eyed glare, the rigid military posture. Briggs had aged well, still as broad-shouldered and imposing as ever, his uniform pristine despite the dust of the desert. "You look like hell," Briggs said, stepping forward. Jack smirked. "And you look like you haven't smiled in a decade." Briggs didn't laugh. Instead, he glanced at the house. "You have a visitor." Jack leaned against the doorframe. "Noticed that, did you?" Briggs crossed his arms. "He's making a lot of noise. You know what happens when someone stirs up ghosts like Epsilon Prime." Jack shrugged. "So?" Briggs' voice lowered. "So walk away. Let it go. Earth's not going to risk open war with the Dominion." Jack chuckled dryly. "You think I care what Earth wants?" Briggs sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Damn it, Jack. You're retired. You got out. Stay out." Jack stepped forward, looking Briggs in the eye. "Let me ask you something, Colonel. If Epsilon Prime was just another fallen colony, why the hell are you here warning me?" Briggs didn't answer. Jack smirked, shaking his head. "Thought so." He turned, walking back inside. Briggs called after him. "Jack, don't do this." Jack didn't even look back. "Who said anything about asking permission?" Jack Calloway had always known that war wasn't won with fancy speeches or grand armies. It was won in the shadows, in the small moments before the enemy even realized they were losing. He didn't need an army, he just needed the right people. The problem was, they were all either retired, dead, or worse, disillusioned. His first stop was a dingy backroom of a casino on Titan, where Vincent, Vex, Holloway ran an illegal gambling ring. Vex had once been the best sniper in the fleet, capable of hitting a moving target from 3 miles away. Now, he was drinking cheap whiskey and cheating customers out of their credits. Jack dropped a Dominion helmet onto the table in front of him. "Feel like shooting something real again?" Vex glanced at the helmet, then at Jack. "You do realize I make more money sitting here than I ever did in the service, right?" Jack leaned in. They took Epsilon Prime. Vex sighed, setting his drink down. Damn it, Jack. Next was Erin Cole, a demolitions expert who now worked as a mechanic on a mining colony. When Jack found her, she was elbow-deep in engine grease, muttering curses at a broken-down hauler. She didn't even look up. Whatever it is, I'm not interested. Jack smirked. That's a shame. I was going to ask if you still remember how to blow up a Dominion cruiser. She froze. The last stop was Ethan Kessler, a hacker who had once been the Dominion's worst nightmare. He was now working as a corporate drone, buried under endless lines of code for a company that didn't even know his real name. Jack found him at his terminal, staring at a screen full of security logs. You look miserable, Jack said. Kessler didn't even turn around. You look old. Jack tossed a datapad onto the desk. I need someone to break into a Dominion system. Kessler finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. You know this is suicide, right? Jack grinned. Only if we screw up. Kessler sighed. Damn it, Jack. The first strike had to be fast, brutal, and send a message. The Dominion wasn't expecting a fight. They had wiped out Epsilon Prime without breaking a sweat. That was their first mistake. The plan was simple. A Dominion supply freighter was scheduled to make a routine stop at a refueling station near the Kuiper Belt. It was lightly guarded, full of weapons, and carried enough fuel to supply an entire fleet. Jack and his team boarded under the cover of a scheduled maintenance check, disguising themselves as dock workers. The Dominion soldiers barely glanced at them, just another crew in another outpost. Until the first shot was fired. Vex dropped the nearest guard with a silenced round to the head. Erin planted explosives along the freighter's main fuel lines. Kessler hacked into the ship's controls, overriding security before the alarms could even sound. The real surprise came when they opened the cargo bay. Instead of weapons, they found human prisoners, survivors from other fallen colonies, chained and waiting to be transported to labor camps. Jack's jaw tightened. Change of plans, he said. We're getting them out. The ensuing fight was fast and brutal. Dominion soldiers scrambled to respond, but Jack and his team were ghosts, moving with deadly precision. Within minutes, they had freed the prisoners, armed them, and turned the freighter's own weapons against its crew. As the freighter exploded behind them, Jack sent a single message across every known human frequency. Epsilon Prime fell, but humanity doesn't break. We're coming. The Dominion didn't take it seriously. That was their second mistake. The first ripple of rebellion started small. Scattered human factions, pirate groups, and ex-soldiers began striking at Dominion supply lines, targeting weak points and hitting them where it hurt. Jack's team kept moving, taking out outposts, freeing prisoners, and stealing resources. Every battle was another ember in the fire. But Jack knew this wasn't enough. They needed something bigger. He wasn't just going to fight the Dominion. He was going to make them bleed. The Dominion had grown arrogant, believing themselves untouchable. Jack was about to prove them wrong. The key to victory wasn't just striking their forces. It was taking away their ability to strike back. Kessler had managed to crack into a classified Dominion database, and what he found changed everything. They've got a planet cracker cannon, Kessler said, his face pale as he studied the data. It's orbital, fully automated, and designed to wipe out entire worlds with a single shot. Jack leaned in. Where's it pointed? Kessler hesitated. A human colony. It doesn't say which one. Jack clenched his fists. They weren't just conquering colonies anymore. They were erasing them. The weapon was stationed on Outpost V-17, a heavily fortified Dominion installation deep in their territory. No human force had ever even attempted to breach it. Jack cracked his knuckles. Well, guess we'll be the first. The plan was insane, exactly the way Jack liked it. The mission started with Erin planting a massive EMP charge on a Dominion relay station. The moment it detonated, Outpost V-17 went dark, its defenses temporarily disabled. That was their only window. Jack, Vex, and a squad of resistance fighters stormed the base, moving like a hurricane through stunned Dominion forces. The outpost was massive, filled with corridors of reinforced steel and automated defenses that flickered in and out as the power struggled to reboot. By the time the Dominion realized what was happening, Jack had already reached the main control center. The planet Cracker Cannon was online, its targeting system locked on a human world. Jack stared at the screen. He didn't recognize the name of the colony, but that didn't matter. It was home to thousands of innocent people, and they had no idea what was coming. He raised his rifle and fired straight into the control console. Sparks exploded as the system shorted out. "You're not firing this thing today," Jack muttered. The Dominion reinforcements arrived in force. Jack's team fought their way out, the entire station collapsing into chaos. As they fled, Aaron's second round of explosives went off, ensuring the planet Cracker Cannon would never fire again. One victory. Jack knew it wasn't enough. The battle wasn't just being fought with weapons. There were forces working against him that he hadn't accounted for. They had barely made it back to their hidden base when Briggs walked in, flanked by Dominion officers. Jack's instincts told him to shoot first, but he held his fire. Briggs sighed. "I told you not to do this, Jack." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You always were good at following orders." Briggs folded his arms. "And you were always good at getting people killed." Jack shook his head. "You really sold out to them?" Briggs didn't flinch. "I made a choice. We can't win this war, Jack. You're just delaying the inevitable." Jack smirked. "Funny thing about inevitability, I don't believe in it." Briggs stepped forward. "You have no idea what's coming. The Dominion isn't just fighting humanity. They're wiping us out. We surrender now, we survive." Jack scoffed. "You think surviving as slaves is better than dying free?" Briggs didn't answer. Jack drew his pistol faster than Briggs could react, shooting out the lights in the room. Gunfire erupted as Jack's team fought their way out. The betrayal stung, but there was no time to dwell on it. The mission wasn't over. Jack wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. He was fighting for survival. Jack's actions had sparked something far bigger than he had expected. Small human colonies, pirate clans, and even former military factions started hitting the Dominion from every angle. A rebellion was forming. Jack sat at a war table, staring at a hollow map covered in blinking red markers. "We need to take the fight to them before they regroup." Vex grinned. "Sounds like you've got a plan." Jack smirked. "I do." He pointed at the largest marker on the map. "We're going after the Dominion War Council." The Dominion War Council was the heart of their military strategy, a fortress buried deep within their empire, protected by fleets, planetary defenses, and an entire army of elite enforcers. No one had ever attempted an assault on it. No one had been stupid enough to try. Jack Calloway was about to change that. His team had spent weeks gathering intelligence, hitting smaller targets, and drawing Dominion forces away from the War Council's base. The Dominion believed they were fighting scattered resistance cells, not a coordinated army. That was their third mistake. Jack and his strike team infiltrated the Dominion headquarters under the cover of a stolen transport. They moved like shadows, taking out guards, planting charges, and hacking into security systems before anyone knew they were there. Then the first explosion went off. The entire base shook as fire and smoke erupted through the hallways. Dominion officers scrambled for weapons, shouting commands in their guttural language. By the time they realized what was happening, Jack and his team had already reached the central war room. The Dominion warlords, high-ranking commanders who had ordered the destruction of human colonies, stood frozen in disbelief. Jack leveled his rifle. "Bet you didn't see this coming." Chaos erupted. The room became a battleground as Dominion soldiers poured in. Jack and his team fought with brutal efficiency, moving from cover to cover, cutting down the enemy with precision. Explosions rocked the facility as Aaron's charges continued to detonate, sending fire and debris cascading through the corridors. The warlords tried to flee, but Jack wasn't about to let them escape. One by one, they fell, their reign of terror ending in blood and fire. But the real fight was still ahead. As the last Dominion commander fell, a door at the end of the war room slid open. A towering figure stepped through, clad in ornate battle armor, eyes burning with fury. The Dominion's supreme commander. Jack had heard stories about him. A warlord who had led countless campaigns, a strategist who had crushed entire civilizations. Now, he was standing face to face with the man who had burned Epsilon Prime to the ground. Jack tightened his grip on his weapon. "I've been waiting for this." The fight was brutal, raw, and unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. The Supreme Commander was fast, powerful, and relentless, wielding a blade that cut through steel as easily as flesh. Jack dodged, countered, and struck back with everything he had. He was bleeding, battered, but he refused to fall. The battle stretched on, each blow shaking the ground beneath them. Sparks flew, blood spilled, and the sound of clashing weapons echoed through the war room. Then, in a final, desperate move, Jack feinted left, then drove his knife deep into the warlord's chest. The Supreme Commander staggered, eyes wide in disbelief. Jack twisted the blade. "That's for Epsilon Prime." The warlord collapsed, and just like that, the Dominion's greatest weapon was gone. The Dominion Empire had been built on fear, on the belief that they were untouchable, unstoppable. Jack had shattered that illusion. With their warlords dead, their supreme commander defeated, and their headquarters in flames, the Dominion's hold on humanity crumbled overnight. Factions that had once cowered in fear rose up, striking back with newfound courage. The rebellion became a full-scale revolution, pushing the Dominion forces back across the stars. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, humanity had a fighting chance. Jack stood on the bridge of a captured Dominion ship, staring out at the stars. His body ached, his wounds still fresh, but he had never felt more alive. Vex walked up beside him. "So, what now?" Jack smirked, lighting a cigar. "Retirement." Aaron chuckled. "You said that last time." Jack exhaled a plume of smoke. "Yeah. But this time, I mean it." As the ship sailed toward the next battlefield, Jack knew one thing for sure. If the Dominion ever came back, if they ever threatened humanity again, he'd be ready.